Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, June 14th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about a comment President Trump made yesterday about the host city of the Republican National Convention, where he calls Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a quote, horrible city. President Trump called out the state of Wisconsin in a private meeting to Republican leaders on Capitol Hill, his first time returning since he left the White House, the first time returning arguably since the insurrection, in which he makes a comment about a very, very important part of the constituency he hopes to win in the 2024 presidential election. Now, the Republican Party chose Milwaukee, Wisconsin for their convention shortly after Democrats decided to use it in the 2020 presidential election. During COVID, there was no real location base for any of these conventions, and the convention bump was pretty limited and only extended to what we saw on the national level. But Republicans were hoping to get back into the Rust Belt and focus on this region in a very similar way that Democrats have also tried to. In the 2024 election, Democrats have now made the city of Chicago, Illinois, their convention spot, whereas Republicans, of course, have chosen Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But in this comment that Donald Trump made, the mainstream media, the Democratic Party, and the Republican Party have all been up in a frenzy about this comment that Donald Trump has made, arguably because it's probably one of the more poor political decisions that Donald Trump has made recently and just doesn't stand to gain him anything, especially in a battleground state. Now, the one thing that I think has been very clear throughout this entire process is that a comment like this one does have repercussions for the voting base that you are now seeking to go speak at a convention to in the entirety of this city, right? You are taking over the entirety of Milwaukee. There's going to be high security. There's going to be motorcades. There's going to be every Republican leader across the country stationed in that city at one point in time in just around a month from now. I mean, you're talking Donald Trump will be speaking on the Milwaukee stage in roughly a month from today, and yet he calls the entire city horrible. And this comment has now been jumped on by Democrats, as they have now taken this and immediately put up billboards in the area. They have now gone into the Joe Biden website and created merch where they have used this as a way to attack President Trump. You have seen this now as many Democratic leaders come out in the offense against President Trump and really try to paint him as somebody who doesn't know the state well, who doesn't know Wisconsin well, Milwaukee well. And you see that even the mainstream media here is picking up on this, but so is the local press. You see it here on the Milwaukee Journey-Sentinel. You see it on the front page of Milwaukee Press. You are finding that this comment is genuinely making its rounds across the voters in the state of Wisconsin, and it isn't helping Donald Trump. Now, when it first came out, the Trump team tried to immediately dismiss it. They scrambled, and they went so many different directions. At first, a Republican representative, Representative Brian Steele, who actually represents Paul Ryan's new district here, or old district when Paul Ryan decided to retire, and says, "I was in the room. President Trump did not say this." But wait, no, he did say it, according to another representative who says that the comments were actually about voter fraud in Milwaukee. But wait, no, it wasn't this. Another Republican representative tweeted out and said this actually was about the crime rate in Milwaukee. On one hand, it didn't happen. On the other hand, it was about election fraud. On the other hand, it was about crime. They couldn't get their story straight. They couldn't immediately deny it because some Republicans had already treated this as if it was known truth. Others acted like they could just deny the truth. And then they had to scramble. Then they had to piece this together. And while it is one comment in a grand scheme of an election with far more important topics and far more important things for what people are going to vote on, it doesn't help Donald Trump in a state that he lost in the 2020 presidential election. Now, I wouldn't go so far as to say that he would lose the entire election over a comment like this one, but I do think it could have him lose the state of Wisconsin. You see, the problem about Milwaukee isn't that these are voters here that are going to take offense but are still ultimately Republican voters. That's not what's happening in Milwaukee. This is a region of the state that is overwhelmingly Democratic. And you might be thinking, okay, how does it matter if these are Democratic voters anyway? They weren't going to vote for Trump in the first place. Well, when somebody goes on a direct assault against your hometown, goes on a direct attack against your city, it's the same type of, call to action that you might find, for instance, if somebody came after the state of New York. Would that person ever be elected in the New York City Council? The answer is absolutely not. Why? Also, voters are going to not probably choose somebody like that, but they also would find that there are voters out there that would be inspired by very negligible things to get out to vote. If they were on the fence about this election before or on the fence about voting before, comments like this one never help. And depending on how Democrats message on this, because right now they seem to be hammering it in this region of the country, it may make a difference when the amount that separates the two candidates could come down to just 20,000 votes, and arguably could come down to less across the state. Because in over 3 million cast in Wisconsin in 2020, President Biden won by a margin of just over 20,000 votes. 20,000 votes out of a state that had 3 million ballots cast, a margin of less than 3/4 of a percentage point. So yes, every vote matters. And when you take a look at the Milwaukee shift compared to the rest of the state, it actually shifted to the left. Other parts of the state, many of them, shifted to the right. And of course, the state at large had to shift to the left, given that President Trump had won the state in 2016. But it's not as if that victory was as impressive enough to say that he had enough to build him up into the next election, because arguably he did not. The next state I would take a look at, just as an example of when comments like these can be used against you, is the state of New Hampshire. In 2016, Donald Trump almost defeated Hillary Clinton in this state, coming within roughly 3,000 votes of her in this election. Hillary Clinton won by roughly 0.3%. It was the narrowest race of the 2016 election cycle. Donald Trump almost came to be the first Republican to win New Hampshire in quite some time. But then in 2020, he ended up losing the state by roughly 7.3%. While a combination of factors absolutely contributed to Donald Trump's loss in this state again, and by a much larger margin, the swing that we saw in the state of New Hampshire was larger than that of what we saw in states like Georgia, larger than that of what we saw in states like Arizona, larger than that of what we saw in Wisconsin, Michigan, or Pennsylvania. And why do I point that out? Because New Hampshire is a state that, live free or die type of state, is very big on their own turf. Very big on defending New Hampshire, very big on rejecting carpetbaggers, and that's the nature of New Hampshire. So what happened between 2016 and 2020? Well, of course, Democrats were able to hammer in Donald Trump on a number of issues. But a comment that was made that was relevant from 2017 through the 2020 presidential election that Democrats continued to uplift and utilize to attack Donald Trump in New Hampshire was when in 2017, he called and decided to say that in the state of New Hampshire, it is a drug-infested den. Now, this was August of 2017. And again, it was not the defining reason that Donald Trump lost the state, but it was part of it. When you make comments like these, it gives the Democratic Party an immense opportunity to uplift this and make this a known thing in a battleground state. And I cannot help but thinking, had Donald Trump not made this comment, could New Hampshire have been closer? And while it may seem like this is so far out there, I kid you not that there are so many centrist voters out there that are just begrudgingly voting for either side of the aisle for whatever reason, however they felt that day. And if Democrats can combine this as part of their messaging, that Trump doesn't care about Wisconsin, Trump doesn't care about the Milwaukee residents, he doesn't care about you, get out and vote for President Biden, depending on how Democrats are able to weaponize this and position it, just as they did well in the state of New Hampshire, we could see something very similar happen in 2024. And in a way, ultimately decide this state. Now, taking Wisconsin out of my own 2024 election prediction, President Biden still has a pathway to victory. I still give him Michigan, I give him Pennsylvania, and I also give him Arizona. Arizona is a bit different. It's not a Rust Belt state. There's an abortion referendum in that state and a very strong Senate race there for Democrats. But the 10 electoral votes in Wisconsin wouldn't change the outcome of this election. President Biden would still win re-election. And so that's why I don't personally believe that this comment alone could lose Donald Trump the 2024 race in totality. But I do think it could lose in Wisconsin. Again, this race is very competitive, and also it shows that Donald Trump's political instincts, and I've been saying this for months now, just aren't fully there. I think Donald Trump had much smarter political instincts in 2016 and in 2020, and I think that really showed in his performances in some of these states. He was really able to show that he was able in the final stretch of the campaign season to get presidential, get his act together, and get focused on this election. But during his presidency, he got sloppy. He made comments like the ones he made about New Hampshire, which received a lot of backlash, not only from Democrats, but also Republicans across the state. And it became a thing in 2019 and 2020 when Democrats wanted to win over voters in this battleground state. They said, Donald Trump believes your state is a drug-infested den. Why would you vote for somebody who disrespects you like that? Same thing in Milwaukee. And also, Democrats have started to realize that their messaging and their strategy of victory in 2024 isn't about inspiring voters to vote for Biden or to adore Biden or to love Biden, not in the way that they were trying to do for Obama's re-election in 2012. It was entirely, and is entirely, about beating Trump. I mean, you can see this too in the way that new polls have been released, where President Biden makes an improvement amongst the electorate, but the majority of his base comes from voters who are saying, I'm voting for Biden to vote against Donald Trump. It's the same thing we saw happen in 2020, and Republicans promised us this wouldn't work. You need something to vote for, not something to vote against. But Democrats were able to make it a thing, and they were able to do so effectively. They went to states like New Hampshire and said, vote against the guy who called this a drug-infested den. Democrats are now going to Milwaukee and saying, vote against the guy who believes you live in a horrible city. And in terms of inspiring a base, Donald Trump pissing off enough voters could be enough to get them out to vote to the ballot box in a race that is expected to be so exceptionally competitive. In fact, today, Wisconsin stands to be the most competitive state according to the polls, according to the 538 forecast, according to my forecast, according to a lot of people, because Wisconsin is a very close state. Republicans did a right thing by choosing it as their convention location. But Donald Trump tried to really talk about this city in a way that he should not have been, and it backfired immensely. Republicans are trying to build back up on it. In fact, members close to the Donald Trump campaign are trying to call this entirely BS and combine some of the arguments that are being made by 3 different congressmen from the state of Wisconsin. Because their line of reasoning isn't clear. Because Donald Trump's reason for saying it wasn't clear. And it was never even meant to leak in the first place. That's what the problem was. They didn't have an answer for this because they never expected him to say it in the first place, or maybe if they did, they never expected it to get this far. And for a state, again, that is so competitive, where President Biden has a narrow advantage, anything negligible, in seemingly negligible, that bumps Biden up more is only going to help him in this election. That is how elections are won. By death by 1,000 cuts on both sides of the aisle. And right now it looks like Donald Trump is self-administering some of these cuts, just as he did in 2020 and just as he is doing again in 2024. It cannot be understated that the political calculus on comments like these are entirely absent. There is no political calculus. There is no rationale for doing things like this. And I really, really feel bad for the comms people on the Republican side who have to look at this and say, how do we spin it now? Because it's exactly what they're doing. That's exactly what they tried to do, but couldn't do effectively. These comments are probably not going to stop either. And I think the Milwaukee mayor is right, that it could cost him the race. Not the election. I'm not going to go so far as to say that because this is such a small piece of a puzzle. But everything seems to be moving slowly and slowly further away from President Trump that I don't think that this puzzle is shaping up to be Project 2025, right? I don't think that's what we're going to see at the end of it. I think what we are getting closer and closer to is, sure, a very, very competitive race where we really don't know who's going to win on Election Day, but one that slightly leans left. Because Democrats, regardless of President Biden's approval rating, President Biden's age, President Biden's polling numbers, are still on track to do quite well across the country. A lot of people expect them to do well, and so do I. I think we are going to see potentially some 2022 type of figures where there are these levels of inaccuracies compared to what the polls are predicting. And I think Wisconsin could be one of those cases. It is one of the closest states right now, though, and I won't deny that a margin of error can absolutely be explored when it comes down to this race, that Democrats could end up, winning the race by 2 points, and that's still within the margin of error of what we're predicting. Republicans could end up winning by 4 points, and that's within the margin of error. And so it really just depends on, what ends up happening on Election Day, if it is within the margin of error or not. Maybe this is an entirely predictable election, and we just don't think that it is, but I don't think that's the case personally. I mean, if you're asking me, regardless, though, I think that Donald Trump making comments like this one is just really, bad luck. It's bad faith. It's bad politics, to put it plainly. This convention needs to go flawlessly. Milwaukee and Wisconsin are going to be parts of this country that are pivotal for a Donald Trump re-election. Because as I showed you, President Biden has pathways to victory without Wisconsin, and President Trump really does not. Let's say I take away the state of Arizona and give it to Trump. If Biden wins Wisconsin, even by the narrowest of margins, Joe Biden still wins the election. Trump could win Georgia and North Carolina and Florida and Ohio and Iowa and Texas and Maine's 2nd Congressional District, even Nevada, a Clinton state from 2016. If Biden wins Wisconsin, he's for sure winning Michigan and Pennsylvania. He wins those 3. Lose everything else, he wins the election. You keep all the states from Hillary Clinton in 2016, with the exception of Nevada. I'll give that to Trump, and just hold on to Biden's Nebraska 2nd, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. The election is locked up for Biden. And so that's really the problem here for President Trump, that he needs everything. And the moment that he makes his comments like these, the moment he opens his mouth and makes decisions like this one, you start to see why we are less and less confident that despite the polls and despite what the pundits are saying, that President Trump has a very strong chance of victory. I think he's close to it, but he always sets himself back when he decides to make comments like these, decides to put himself out there like this, and I think it has served to be one of the biggest detriments to his campaign in 2016 even, 2020 when he lost, and now again in 2024. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.